The Ontario government just passed Bill 60, making it legal for landlords to evict tenants for personal use without paying compensation when landlords give 120 days notice and meet specific termination requirements. The bill passed its final vote on Monday, while protesters filled Queen's Park, chanting "People over profits," before security cleared the public gallery. Tenant groups are calling it the biggest attack on renters' rights in decades. Acorn Canada organized the protests, saying the bill erodes security of tenure and rent control. But landlord associations say it will finally unlock vacant units and help the housing crisis. Premier Ford told the demonstrators to go find a job as they were removed from the legislature. To understand why this bill creates such strong reactions, you need to see how broken the system was before these changes. The bill is just under 50 pages long. We will highlight the fundamental sections. I'm Kane. I've been in the housing industry for about 20 years and own properties throughout Ontario. Watch my biography video to see my story. Also be sure to check the references in the description below to see where I've pulled this information from. If there are any discrepancies, please let me know. Without further ado, let's dive into it. Most people don't realize how broken Ontario's rental system was before this bill passed. The Landlord and Tenant Board was taking over 7 months just to schedule a hearing for unpaid rent. Think about what that means for a landlord. You have a tenant who stops paying rent in January. You file with the LTB in February. You don't get a hearing until September or October. That's almost a full year of lost rental income while you still pay the mortgage, property taxes, and maintenance costs. Landlords were losing substantial amounts during those extended waiting periods. Many landlords couldn't afford to carry those losses month after month. They had their own mortgages and bills to pay. Some property owners went into debt or had to sell properties because of these delays. Tenants could potentially raise maintenance issues at the last minute during eviction hearings, even if they hadn't paid rent in months. It worked like this. A tenant stops paying rent for 4 months. The landlord finally gets a hearing date. The day of the hearing, bad faith tenants suddenly could claim the furnace is broken or there are mice in the unit. The hearing gets delayed while the LTB investigates how legitimate these new claims are. This could add another few months to the process. Fortunately, the probability of this occurring is low. In any case, the system created a situation where good tenants suffered because landlords avoided renting to anyone with questionable income. Landlords became extremely specific about who they rented to. As a hypothetical example, they wanted 3 references: credit scores above 700, and proof of income at least 3 times the rent. People with lower incomes, newcomers to Canada, or anyone with past credit problems couldn't find good places to rent. The lengthy eviction process made landlords too afraid to take any risks. Corporations are usually financially well off. They may simply keep units vacant rather than deal with the lengthy eviction process. Empty basement apartments stayed empty. People chose not to rent out their second properties. Some landlords converted rental units back to single-family homes instead of dealing with tenant problems. This reduced the rental supply when Ontario desperately needed more housing. But to be honest, this housing problem is worldwide, not just in Ontario. One should also understand that wealthy corporations owning property typically has everyday individuals investing in the company's shares in hopes for a return similar to your stock account. These individuals are also trying to provide for their families, and they expect the corporation to give them a return when they invest in that company. However, the vulnerable property owners are far more volatile and is usually a mom and pop shop, where hardworking parents are trying to invest into their children's future, whom cannot afford to keep their units empty, and thus may attract bad faith tenants that will take advantage of the system. Development approvals were taking years, with municipal planning departments creating endless delays. A simple residential project could take 3 years to get approved. Developers had to hire consultants, attend multiple committee meetings, and revise plans over and over. These delays increased construction costs and made it harder to build new rental housing. Many developers gave up on rental projects because they couldn't predict when they'd get approval. The old compensation rules meant landlords had to pay tenants or find them new places even for legitimate personal use. If you wanted to move your elderly parent into your rental unit, you had to pay the tenant 1 month's rent to leave, or you had to find them another comparable rental unit in the same area. This made it expensive and difficult for property owners to use their own properties for family needs. These rules applied even when landlords had legitimate reasons for needing the unit back. Adult children moving back home, elderly parents needing care, or divorce situations where someone needed a place to live. The compensation requirements discouraged many legitimate personal use evictions. Landlords often chose to keep problem tenants instead of going through the expensive process. Municipal planning departments could delay projects for years without clear timelines or reasons. Developers never knew when they'd get final approval. This uncertainty made it hard to secure construction financing. Lenders don't want to fund projects that might never get built. The planning delays reduced new housing construction across the province. This created a rental market where supply was artificially restricted and costs kept rising. Fewer landlords meant less competition for tenants' rent money. Vacant units stayed vacant. New construction slowed down. All of these factors, along with some other ones, pushed rental prices higher and higher. Good tenants paid more because the system protected bad actors. Attorney General Doug Downey estimated that addressing these problems could help unlock tens or even hundreds of thousands of rental units by achieving the right balance. Bill 60 aims to fix these fundamental problems with a completely different approach. The new legislation provides landlords with 3 major powers that reshape how evictions work in Ontario. The first change promises to cut LTB hearing times for rent arrears cases. This means a landlord who files an eviction application in January could get their hearing much earlier instead of waiting until August. The government says this will reduce the financial burden on landlords who were losing substantial amounts during those long delays. The second item requires tenants to pay at least 50% of the arrears identified in the landlord's application before they can introduce new matters as a defense. Take a hypothetical example. Tenant owes $4,000 in back rent. Under the old system, a bad faith tenant could show up to the hearing and claim the heat doesn't work, or there are cockroaches in the unit. The hearing would get delayed while the LTB investigated these claims. Under Bill 60, that same tenant must pay $2,000 upfront before they can even mention those maintenance problems. The government designed this rule to stop what they call last-minute adjournments. This stops the common tactic where non-paying tenants would claim broken appliances or pest problems to delay eviction. Landlords complained that tenants would wait until the hearing date to suddenly discover urgent repairs needed in their unit. These claims often took months to investigate. During that time, the tenant stayed in the unit without paying rent. The landlord had to wait even longer to collect money or regain possession of their property. Review windows for LTB decisions shrink from 30 days to just 15 days, making it harder for bad faith tenants to drag out the process. When a tenant loses at the LTB, they have half the time to request a review of the decision. The new law only allows extensions in exceptional circumstances. This change reduces the total time from initial filing to final resolution of eviction cases. Personal use evictions no longer require compensation when landlords provide notice that is at least 120 days after the notice is given, and where the date for termination is the day a period of tenancy ends. Under the old rules, landlords who wanted their unit back for family use had to pay the tenant 1 month's rent or find them another place. The new system eliminates this requirement as long as the landlord provides proper notice meeting these specific criteria. This applies when landlords need the unit for themselves, their children, their parents, or their spouse's family. Notice periods for non-payment of rent evictions drop from 14 days to 7 days, speeding up the entire process. Landlords can now give notice of termination effective not earlier than the 7th day after the notice is given. This means tenants have less time to find new housing or resolve their rent arrears. The change applies specifically to cases where tenants fail to pay rent lawfully owing under their tenancy agreement. These changes mean landlords can now predict cash flow and make business decisions based on reliable timelines. Instead of waiting 8 months for a hearing, landlords expect to get their day at the LTB within a much shorter amount of time. They can calculate how much money they'll lose and plan accordingly. This predictability makes rental property investment less risky from a cash flow perspective. Landlords can also budget for eviction costs more accurately. They know exactly how long the process should take and how much rental income they'll lose. This helps them decide whether to pursue eviction or work out payment plans with tenants. The shortened timelines also mean landlords can get problematic tenants out faster and find new ones to replace the lost income. The compensation elimination for personal use evictions saves landlords money when they have legitimate family needs for their property. A landlord who needs to move their elderly parent into the rental unit no longer faces a penalty on top of losing rental income. They just need to provide proper notice instead of paying the tenant to leave. The Toronto Regional Real Estate Board says this will unlock thousands of basement apartments and vacant units. They believe these measures will strengthen the rental housing system for both tenants and landlords, However, these same changes that landlords celebrate have created fierce opposition from tenant advocacy groups across the province. Tenant advocates are calling Bill 60 the biggest attack on renters' rights in Ontario history. The 50% payment requirement creates what critics call an impossible barrier for low-income tenants. A tenant facing eviction for $3,000 in back rent must now pay $1,500 upfront just to argue their case about broken heating or pest infestations. Many tenants living paycheck to paycheck don't have that kind of money sitting in their bank accounts. They fell behind on rent because they couldn't afford it in the first place. The math gets worse for families with higher rent amounts. A tenant who owes $6,000 in back rent needs to come up with $3,000 before their hearing. That's more than most people have in their emergency savings. These tenants lose the right to defend themselves not because their maintenance complaints are fake, but because they can't afford the entry fee to justice. Honest, hardworking tenants often have legitimate reasons for falling behind on rent. They lose their jobs, get sick, or have their hours cut. Under the old system, they could still argue that their landlord failed to maintain the property. Maybe the heat stopped working in January and the landlord ignored repair requests for months. Maybe there's black mold growing in the bathroom that the landlord refuses to fix. These health and safety issues don't disappear just because the tenant lost income. The shortened appeal window means tenants have half the time to find legal help or gather evidence for their defense. Finding a lawyer who handles tenant issues takes time. Legal aid clinics have waiting lists. Tenants need time to collect photos, repair estimates, and witness statements to prove their case. Cutting the appeal window from 30 days to 15 days makes it much harder to build a proper defense. Most tenants don't understand their rights under the Residential Tenancies Act. They need time to research the law or find someone to explain their options. 2 weeks barely gives them enough time to figure out what documents they need, let alone gather everything together. This rushed timeline favors landlords who have lawyers and property managers already working for them. Personal use evictions become much easier for landlords, with tenant groups warning about fake family member moves, the compensation requirement used to make landlords think twice before claiming they needed the unit for family. Now landlords can evict tenants without paying anything as long as they give proper notice that meets the specific 120-day criteria. This opens the door to abuse where landlords lie about needing the unit for personal use. A landlord could claim their adult child needs the apartment, evict the tenant, then rent it out to someone else for higher rent a few months later. The tenant has no way to verify whether the landlord actually moved a family member in. By the time they find out about the fraud, they've already been displaced and found new housing. The old compensation requirement at least created some cost for these fake evictions. Acorn Canada organized protests at Queen's Park, with members kicked out of the legislature on Monday for chanting "people over profits" during the final vote on the bill. NDP Shadow Minister for Housing, MPP Catherine McKenney, stated that Bill 60 strips away protections, accelerates evictions, and hands more power to property management companies and corporations already driving rents through the roof. The new system prioritizes speed over due process, potentially pushing vulnerable renters onto the street faster. Families with children, seniors on fixed incomes, and people with disabilities face the same shortened timelines as everyone else. They don't get extra time to find new housing or resolve their situations. The faster eviction process doesn't consider the human cost of displacement. Critics point out that faster evictions don't solve the underlying problem of housing affordability. Moving people out of their homes faster doesn't create more affordable units. It just moves the problem around. The same tenant who couldn't afford $2,000 rent still can't afford $2,000 rent somewhere else. Meanwhile, the landlord often re-rents the unit for even more money. Tenant advocates worry this creates a two-tier justice system where only tenants with money can defend themselves. Those who can afford the 50% payment keep their right to raise maintenance issues. Those who can't afford it lose that right regardless of how legitimate their complaints might be. But the tenant-landlord battles only tell part of the story. Bill 60 also makes sweeping changes to how housing gets built and financed across Ontario. The Planning Act changes give the Minister of Municipal Affairs new powers to override local zoning decisions, with decisions no longer required to be consistent with provincial policy statements, except for Greenbelt lands. This change applies retroactively even to ministerial decisions made prior to Bill 60. The provincial government can now step in when municipalities take too long to approve housing projects. The minister can force cities and towns to allow certain types of development, even when local councils vote against them. Ministerial zoning orders, also known as MZO, become non-regulatory orders published on government websites instead of formal regulations. Under the old system, these orders had to go through a lengthy regulatory process that could take months. With the new changes, the minister can post the order online and it becomes active immediately. The government's stated intention with this change is to expedite the process of issuing MZOs to support provincial priorities like long-term care, transit-oriented communities, and housing. This cuts weeks or months off the approval timeline for major housing developments. Development charges get restructured with new transparency requirements and standardized cost recovery methods. Municipalities must now create development charge bylaws that impose development charges in respect of capital costs described in specific subsections, providing for a class consisting only of those capital costs. Cities and towns also need to establish local service policies for each service in respect of which a bylaw imposes a development charge. If municipalities want to continue imposing local service requirements through subdivision approval, they must adopt a local service policy within the timeframe set by the province. This restructuring brings greater transparency to how development charges get collected and spent. Developers now know exactly what fees they'll pay for each type of service. The standardized system makes it easier to compare costs between different municipalities. This helps developers choose where to build based on clear fee structures rather than guessing about hidden costs. Transit-oriented development becomes mandatory in designated areas, tying housing approvals to transit and infrastructure. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs can now issue orders requiring landowners within designated transit-oriented community lands to enter agreements with municipalities. These agreements must address matters the ministry considers necessary for appropriate land development. This links housing approvals with transit and infrastructure development to create more livable communities. The integration of housing and transit planning increases the attractiveness and value of emerging areas. Properties near transit stations become more valuable because residents can easily get to work without cars. This creates incentives for developers to build rental housing in these locations. The mandatory nature of these requirements means developers can't avoid building near transit, even if they prefer other locations. These changes reduce what lenders call entitlement risk, the chance that approvals get delayed or denied. When a developer applies for permits under the old system, they never knew if municipal councils would approve their project. Local politics could kill projects that met all the technical requirements. Neighborhood opposition could delay approvals for years, even when the development followed all the rules. Construction and bridge financing becomes more predictable when developers can count on faster approvals. Banks and private lenders want to know their borrowers will actually be able to build the projects they're funding. Long approval delays meant construction loans sat unused while developers waited for permits. Interest costs piled up during these delays, making projects less profitable or completely unviable. The new system creates clearer timelines for multi-phase developments that rely on long-term project financing. Large rental projects often get built in stages over several years. Each phase needs separate approvals and financing. When approval timelines are unpredictable, lenders can't properly structure their loans. The clearer timelines help lenders design financing packages that match the actual construction schedule. This makes it easier for private lenders and mortgage investment corporations to finance rental projects. These lenders often focus on shorter-term construction loans where timing is critical. Predictable approval processes help them manage their own cash flows and commitments to investors. The clearer rules also make it easier to evaluate the risk of different projects and price loans accordingly. These planning changes create both opportunities and new uncertainties that financial institutions must now navigate carefully. Mortgage lenders and real estate investors now face a completely different risk profile in Ontario's rental market. Faster LTV processes improve cash flow modeling when landlords can predict their rental income quicker instead of waiting over 7 to 9 months for hearings. This predictability helps lenders calculate loan payments more accurately and decide how much money to lend on rental properties. A landlord applying for a mortgage can now show their lender more reliable timelines for dealing with bad faith tenants. They can demonstrate they'll get rental income back more quickly if someone stops paying. This makes rental property loans less risky from the lender's perspective, since banks prefer loans where they can predict the borrower's income stream. However, constitutional challenges to expanded ministerial powers create uncertainty for long-term loans. The Planning Act changes give the Minister of Municipal Affairs new powers to override local decisions, and planning centralization may face constitutional challenges. Some legal experts question whether these powers might violate constitutional rules about local government authority. If courts strike down these powers, development projects could get delayed or cancelled. Long-term construction loans depend on getting approvals on schedule. If the new ministerial powers get challenged in court, projects might face delays during the legal process. Lenders making 2 or 3 year construction loans need to know the rules won't change halfway through the project. Political reversal risk looms if future governments decide to roll back these changes. Given the controversial nature of Bill 60 and the level of opposition it has faced, including organized protests at Queen's Park and strong criticism from tenant advocacy groups, future administrations might take a different approach. Ontario has provincial elections every 4 years. The next government might belong to a different political party, with different views on landlord and tenant rights. Lenders making long-term loans need to consider what happens if the rules change again in 2 or 3 years. A 5-year mortgage might see different LTV rules before it gets renewed. This political uncertainty makes it harder to price loans accurately. The streamlined eviction processes may lead to higher eviction velocity, potentially increasing turnover costs for landlords. Faster evictions mean landlords might evict tenants more often instead of working out payment plans. Each tenant turnover costs money for cleaning, repairs, advertising, and screening new tenants. A landlord who evicts 3 tenants per year instead of 1 tenant faces much higher turnover costs. These costs reduce the net rental income available to pay mortgages. Lenders need to factor these higher operating costs into their loan calculations, while lenders, on the other hand, must now factor in borrowers' LTV histories and update stress tests for multiple regulatory scenarios. Banks already check credit scores and employment history. Now they might also check how many LTV cases a landlord has been involved in. Too many eviction cases might indicate a problem landlord who can't keep tenants. Stress tests help lenders see if borrowers can handle different situations. Lenders might now test what happens if eviction costs rise or political changes affect the rules. Multiple scenario planning helps protect the lender's investment. The regulatory changes create both opportunities for faster approvals and new risks around legal challenges and political reversals. Lenders are reassessing their approaches and updating loan documentation to reflect this new environment. The ultimate success of these changes will depend on whether they achieve their stated goals or create new problems in Ontario's housing market. These legislative changes now represent Ontario's immediate future rather than theoretical policy debates. Bill 60 has passed the legislature and awaits royal assent, making these new landlord powers and development rules an imminent reality for millions of renters and property owners. The government fundamentally shifts power from tenants to landlords while betting that faster development will create enough supply to help everyone. The province assumes that streamlined evictions and quicker approvals will unlock thousands of rental units and speed up construction of new housing. However, Ontario has quietly backed away from its goal of building 1.5 million homes over 10 years by 2031. The real test will be whether these changes actually produce meaningful housing supply or simply make it easier to displace existing tenants. Right now, we don't know if faster evictions lead to more supply or just higher rents. If you're investing in Ontario real estate, understanding these new rules isn't optional. If you've enjoyed this content, be sure to watch my next video on where I review the different levels of success in life. What's the mindset behind a person earning $100K versus $100 million?